Welcome to the BriteVibe podcast. At BriteVibe, we believe everyone deserves to be happy. But in today's world, everywhere you turn, there is division and negativity. At BriteVibe, we have created a global movement to bring 8 million people together who are inspired to live bright, live bold, and share bright vibes. Alone, it can be hard to change, but together we can change the world. Welcome to the BriteVibe podcast. So Dr. William Pawluck, MD, welcome to the show today. So happy to have you on.
Thank you so very much for bringing me on. I look forward, Matt, to sharing with your audience and your listeners.
Yes, definitely. And so the bulk of what we're going to talk about today is called PEMF, Pulsed Electromagnetic Field Therapy. That's what we're going to talk about on the show. So for people tuning in, we're going to get to that. But first, and why people do that is typically, if I'm not mistaken, pain relief. Is that
the most common reason?
Yeah, the most common reason. And I'm fascinated by this topic. I know a little bit about it, and so I'm looking forward to learning about it more today. But basically, the show is going to be about if you have pain, know people in pain, want to do something that's more holistic than just take meds, this is a great therapy for you. And I've heard that phenomenal results from people. So we're going to get into that. But first of all, so you're an MD, but you also, did you get a naturopathic degree as well, or you just lean towards naturopathic? How do you want to say that?
Naturopathy?
No, thank you. I was like, I've never actually said it that way. So yes.
Well, I should have been a naturopath.
Okay.
Because that's my sort of proclivity. That's
Yes.
my leaning.
Yep.
As you said. But what happens is that certainly as I was practicing medicine, you begin to realize the limitations of medicine. So like Harvard Law School or Harvard MBA, they don't really teach you what to do with your MBA when you go to Harvard, right?
Yeah.
So you have to learn how to do the work of the MBA long after you leave school. The same thing happens with medical school.
Right.
And the same thing happens with medical training and research and the way doctors learn how to do practice medicine, essentially.
Right. So you were an MD, and how long did you practice as did you practice as a MD, kind of more traditional MD for a period of time?
Yeah. So basically, I worked as an MD for about 30 years.
Oh my. Okay.
And I brought my MD-ness into my sort of natural medicine-ness. I actually called myself a holistic doctor.
Yeah, okay.
So that meant that I basically dealt with a broad spectrum of problems and bringing in whatever tools I needed to bring in to solve a problem.
Right.
So you could have certain doctors like naturopaths, for example, who specialize in supplements.
Right. Got it.
But naturopathic doctors are often trained in acupuncture. But very often they don't do any acupuncture. They're just trained in it.
Right.
And there are acupuncturists who don't do natural medicine. They just do acupuncture. So there's a lot of crossover in disciplines. And as most clinicians, if you will, the longer they practice, the more they realize their limitations of what they've learned to do.
Right.
And the fewer tools you have at your disposal, the more limited you are.
Right.
So as a primary care doctor, as a family physician originally, you have to deal with whatever walks in that door.
Right.
Same thing that happens with an ER doctor. Whatever walks in the door, you got to be able to take care of.
Right.
All right. Yep. No discrimination for sex, gender, age, how severe the problem is, what organ the problem is, et cetera. You deal with whatever's in front of you. And so over time, again, you realize that there are significant limitations to your particular tool chest.
Yes.
And if your tool chest happens to be prescriptions, physical therapy, surgery, maybe psychiatry, then that's the tool set that you're dealing with.
Right.
So again, most doctors eventually, after 5 to 8 years of practice, begin to realize the limitations of what they're doing. And I think credible doctors, really credible doctors who are true physicians, not just doctors, begin to realize this and they say, okay, now what do I do?
Right.
And so what's happening now more and more and more is more and more doctors are beginning to gravitate over to sort of natural medicine or holistic medicine or integrative medicine or complementary medicine, right? They're learning all these other techniques.
Right.
And then the spectrum of things that they can deal with dramatically expands. My patients, when I started doing acupuncture, it's the first time I experienced patients walking out of the office smiling.
Huh. Interesting.
They felt better.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Nothing that I did other than acupuncture ever make them feel better.
Right.
I mean, I'm not supposed to kiss or hug patients, so I can't do that.
Right.
So with acupuncture, they felt better. So I said, wow. And then when you start doing holistic medicine, you start prescribing supplements and herbs and spending time actually talking to people. So my shortest appointments became half an hour.
Oh, wow. Right. Which is
What's the shortest appointment in a doctor's office today?
yeah, 5 minutes probably.
5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Yeah. Exactly.
You can't do anything in 12 minutes, but you can barely do something in 30 minutes.
Right. Yep. And so you were an MD for this 30 years, and I'm sure it was more than likely a progression of moving more and more to the holistic side. Is that accurate to say? I mean, it was probably in the beginning.
Well, actually, it was a trauma that happened.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So let's talk about that.
So that could be, in a sense, it was a PTSD moment.
Okay.
Right. It wasn't, but that's how you can sort of think of it. So I was a medical director for a group of doctors, and we shared patients in the hospital. I had 14 family doctors rounding in the hospital on patients.
So you were a hospitalist then?
No, I was a family physician that did hospital rounds.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
It wasn't based in the hospital.
Got it. Okay.
So part of my day would be spent going to the hospital to do rounds.
Yep.
So in a very short period of time, we had a couple of patients almost die. One almost died, very close to death, and the other one was very, very close to death of gastric bleeding from ibuprofen.
Oh, interesting. Mm-hmm.
And I said, I've seen enough of this. I've heard enough of this. This is stupid medicine. This is a definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again, not expecting, bad results. Sort of a twist on that concept. Mm-hmm. So I said, I got to do something different, because I knew what my peers did. I knew what my consultants did. I knew what everybody around me was doing for pain management. And that was in 1988 or so. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I got to do something different. And I was already aware of acupuncture. Mm-hmm. So I decided to go and study acupuncture at a UCLA school for physicians. Mm-hmm. I learned acupuncture, and I came out of acupuncture school, got my training, and getting ready to go ahead and put those needles in. Mm-hmm. And patient said, no needles. Well, acupuncture wasn't known then that much in 1990.
Right.
It didn't get really publicized until Madonna had needles put in her back.
Oh, I did not know that, but okay, I believe you.
There was a movie with Madonna sitting on a table with needles up and down her back.
Okay.
Well, that it started before then, but basically after that.
Right.
So acupuncture, I found people wouldn't accept acupuncture. So I had to look for a different way of doing acupuncture, and I discovered that in the Orient, they'd been using magnets.
Oh, interesting.
On acupuncture points. Small little magnets.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, and they put those on acupuncture points and get results. So it turns out that you can stimulate acupuncture points in a lot of ways. You can use lasers, you could use light, you could use heat, you could use cold, you could use friction, you could use pressure, you could use electrical charges. There's many ways of stimulating an acupuncture point. Mm-hmm. So magnets work on that too. And after that, I started using magnets and began to discover that the magnets were doing other things than acupuncture. Mm-hmm. For example, I had a spider bite. I had a bite on my leg. I wasn't even aware I got bit. I looked down and I had this big welt on my lower leg. And I said, okay, well, this looks like a spider bite. Having been a family doctor for a long time, I know what a spider bite looks like.
Right.
I said, okay, so I put a magnet on it, put a big magnet on it. And it's near an acupuncture point on the leg. Mm-hmm. But anyway, put a big magnet on it, and literally within 30 minutes, gone. And how long does it take a spider bite to heal?
Oh, right. Yeah. Weeks. Yeah.
Right? If you don't attack it really quickly. Mm-hmm. And what we have in medicine is not going to help you to deal with the spider bite. An antibiotic's not going to help you because you get venom put into the tissues. Mm-hmm. And the venom causes an inflammatory response. Then you get secondary bacterial infection on top of that. Mm-hmm. But if you hit it right away with magnets, bang, gone, done. Mm-hmm. Literally gone. So I have many more stories like that. Another one, not related to that timeline, but my wife broke her little toe. So little toe was bent out. Yep. Right? Okay, that's a broken toe.
Yeah.
Right, so it was black and blue and purple and swollen and painful. She did it on lawn furniture, and so I knew what it was, and she refused to get an x-ray, but I knew what it was. So I did what medicine does. You take those toes and you
tape them together.
Tape them together,
right?
So called bunny taping, mm-hmm. And you put them in a platform shoe, a flat shoe,
right?
Like a flat-soled shoe. Mm-hmm. Usually it's a wooden shoe if you have it, but otherwise a flat-soled shoe. She did that, started magnetic field therapy with a battery-operated portable magnetic device. Mm-hmm. Did that until the next morning. Next morning she woke up, so she did it continuously until the next morning. Woke up, swelling's gone, bruising is gone, pain is gone. So I said, okay, I'm not convinced yet.
Right.
You're feeling better, but that doesn't mean that it's healed.
Right.
So we continued the magnetic therapy for another 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So she woke up the next morning. So this is now a day and a half later. And same thing, no swelling, no bruising, no pain. The pain is even more gone, if you will, if that's an expression.
Right.
She walked a mile in tennis shoes. Not supposed to do that. No.
Right.
But she walked a mile in tennis shoes, didn't make it any worse. She did another 24 hours of the magnetic field, keeping it right over the toes, right over the foot, and woke up, swelling, no pain, etc. Put on tennis shoes, walked 3 miles in tennis shoes, and that was the end of the treatment.
And so then you were...
In my experience as a family physician, this is a 2 to 6 week process.
Right.
Again, another example, poof, it's gone.
And so you started using this in your practice. Is that kind of how it started? You use it.
So then you start using it in the practice. You start talking to friends and neighbors and family members who have this problem or that problem, and you start putting magnets on different areas of the body, and you continue to see all these results. So it went beyond acupuncture to direct tissue healing. So I discovered that, in fact, even though magnetic fields work on acupuncture points and meridians, and I couldn't understand why, I subsequently found out why, they worked on meridians, but they had their own tissue healing effects, even away from an acupuncture point or a meridian. So I said, what's going on here? And started studying the science. And along the way, because the science is hard to reach, the science was actually written mostly in Cyrillic and the Eastern European languages. I met a doctor, an MD PhD from the Czech Republic, and we collaborated on a manuscript and produced a book called Magnetic Field Therapy in Eastern Europe, a review of 30 years of research. So at that time, in approximately 90, we produced this book. So at that time, it was 30 years of research.
Right.
So now it's how many years later?
Yeah, at least 30.
Another 20 to 30 years later.
Yeah.
So this is old science now from Eastern Europe. And that book, the manuscript, he had reviewed the science, basically the studies that had been done in Eastern Europe. None of those were available to us in the West. We were in the dark when it came to magnetic field therapy, but it was reasonably popular and reasonably well known in Europe. So the manuscript sort of opened the landscape completely. So here's the science, here's research, here are human studies, and here are some of the effects that we see with magnetic field therapy. And it was basically showing me some of the things that I was already seeing. Now we had the science.
Okay, so for people who've never heard of this, because I'd like to start with just let's assume that nobody's ever heard of this. So pulsed electromagnetic field therapy. So you're actually taking magnets, some type of magnets, and you're, according to the name here, you're electrifying those magnets to some degree. You're amping. I remember from old science classes, if you take a magnet and you wrapped it in something that had an electric current through it, it increased the intensity of the magnet. You could pick up more nails if you made the magnet basically an electromagnet, right? So you're creating an electromagnetic. You have some type of electromagnetic device or magnet, and then you're somehow placing that on the body and experiencing some type of pain relief or some type of healing. Now, for a lot of people who are listening, that's probably going to sound very woo-woo and very out there, and I'm sure this isn't the first time that you've heard that. So for people who have never, so basically, if you're just listening to this, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to put a magnet on my body and it's going to somehow heal me. Sounds a little out there. So how do you address those concerns?
All right. So first of all, we have to back up even more.
Okay.
So after getting that book from Eastern Europe, and they talked about static magnetic fields, but they also talked about electric fields.
Okay.
Electromagnetic fields.
Okay.
You don't need a magnet. You don't need a magnet. So what you do is the principle is that if you pass a current through a wire, the current produces a magnetic field that's subject to what we call the right-hand law.
Okay.
Right-hand rule. So my thumb is the current, the direction of the current.
Yep.
The magnetic field is my fingers.
Okay.
So the magnetic current, the magnetic field wraps around the wire three-dimensionally.
Okay.
So whenever the current pulses, you get these pulses, right? You get the waves, and that's what the frequencies of the current in our wiring.
Okay.
It's pulsing. It's constantly pulsing. So every time it pulses, the magnetic field goes like that.
Okay. And you're talking
Right.
about specifically with alternating current then. Are you talking about specifically with alternating current?
That's where it was discovered originally, was with alternating current.
Okay. All right.
All right. So as that magnetic field pulses, then the magnetic field broadcasts itself out basically into the environment. But then it collapses back on itself.
Right.
So this is what we call a closed loop. EMFs, like microwaves, television signals, radio signals, radar, that gets broadcast out into the environment and goes on essentially forever. Okay, that's called an open loop.
Okay, this is a closed
loop. That has
loop.
frequencies, that has waveforms to it.
Right.
Okay, this configuration does not. Now the current may have a different waveform, and it may alternate, as you said before, which you can do, and you still get a magnetic field that way, or you can change that current so that it only goes in one direction. So it only goes up in this direction.
Okay.
So basically now you have a lot of control over that production of that magnetic field. And that magnetic field, like magnets, has no limitations.
And so why doesn't a magnetic field, and I think I have some probably novice answers in my head, but why does a magnetic field affect the physical body? Because I could say, well, we're not metal, right?
We're tissue.
Right, we're tissue. So, and I know if I put a magnet on my hand, it falls off. So it feels like that it's not attracted to me. I'm not a robot.
It's not a magnet with nails, right?
Right.
Yes.
It's not the magnet with nails. So why does a magnet, or a magnetic field, to be more accurate, why does that affect my physical tissues and or even meridians why does it affect?
Okay. So what happens is that the magnetic field, as it passes through wherever it's passing through, if there are any ionic charges or current in that area, the magnetic field interacts with that current. And what happens then is that you actually induce charge in the body. So what is a body? A body's a big it's a big battery.
Right, I agree. Yeah, it's a big battery.
Right?
Yep.
It's all electrolytes and charge, and everything's in motion continuously in the body.
Yep.
So as the magnetic field passes through that, it's stimulating all that ionic activity. And what it does then is it induces charge. And we call that inductively coupled electrical stimulation.
I'm not going to remember that one, but okay.
Right?
Right.
Inductively coupled electrical stimulation. So basically what you're doing is you're producing current. The magnetic field is not producing the current.
Okay.
It's the magnetic field interacting with the electrolyte battery of the body.
Got it.
That's producing the current. So the currents that the body then produces are then used as energy for whatever the body wants.
So you're creating more energy in the body then?
Correct.
Okay. So and again, it's easy for me to put it in layman's terms because I have a layman's mind. So it's super easy for me to go, okay, this is how. So it's almost like you're charging a car battery to some degree. That you're not a car battery. You're and it may be not quite exactly the same, but in essence, you're introducing more energy into the car battery. You charge it. You take the thing off. The battery now has more energy in it, right? You could measure more voltage in the battery, or amperage, probably amperage, or whichever way that works. Okay.
And that was discovered a long time ago by Maxwell and Faraday.
Okay.
So Michael Faraday, back in the 1700s, early 1800s, discovered that when you have a coil,
Yeah.
an electrical coil, without any electricity passing through it, and you pass a magnetic field past that coil, the magnetic field is interacting with the metal of the coil to then produce charge. And what happens? The light bulb goes off.
Right. Is there something called Faraday's law or Faraday's principle?
It's Faraday's law. So this is actually the principle of magnetic field therapy working in the body. It works through the principle of Faraday's law. You're inducing charge in the body.
Yep.
As you induce the charge, you produce the energy, increase the energy level that's available in the tissues and cells, then all kinds of healing begins to happen. So a fracture that won't heal. So one of the major uses of magnetic field therapy that was approved by the government, by the FDA, was for what we call non-union fractures.
Non-union fractures? What's that mean?
So a fracture that doesn't heal after 6 months is considered a non-union.
Got
it. Doesn't unite.
Right. Won't okay, right? Got it.
It doesn't combine itself.
Right.
So those are disastrous, and they typically don't heal. If they haven't healed by then, they probably won't.
Okay.
And so the medical solutions to them are to do surgery, to put hardware into the body to control the area of the fracture, and you cross your fingers that the body will heal.
Right.
Most of the time it doesn't, and that's why we don't do that so often anymore. But magnetic field therapy, because it induces charge in the body, now we'll take this old fracture, even 7 years old, and all of a sudden wake things up. And as it wakes things up, healing begins to happen. So you could take a relatively small magnetic field and place it over a fracture site that isn't healing, and then in 6 months, it's healed.
And so you're doing that every day for 6 months? Is it like...
Every day. And in the case of the devices that were approved by the federal government, they were very low intensity machines. So they were doing treatments for 9 to 10 hours a day.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Now you need like my wife with the toe.
Right.
Right. You do continuous stimulation.
Right.
A fresh fracture is a lot better than an old stalled fracture. So it takes a lot more energy to get that kicked up and going and moving and reversing, the damage that's been done because of the time element. So the charge production is what causes everything else to happen. And in my book, Power Tools for Health, I review 25 different mechanisms of action of magnetic fields. And I provide scientific references for all of those actions. So one of the actions that's very commonly known is you improve circulation.
Okay. So a magnetic field. So a magnetic field, when it's introduced to the body, does it have to be at a certain frequency?
No.
Really? Okay.
Even static magnets, even fridge magnets will increase circulation.
Really?
Yes.
And is it that you're putting them? So my refrigerator magnet, that I should have some that have funny sayings, but I don't. But the refrigerator magnet, if I'm putting that anywhere on my body, it's going to increase circulation?
Yes, to varying degrees. So the higher the intensity of the magnetic field, the deeper that's going to act into the body, and the deeper the circulation benefits are going to happen. So yes, they did studies with rabbits, where you put a magnet on a rabbit's ear. It's very easy to see the blood supply of a rabbit's ear.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So you put a magnet on it, and all of a sudden the circulation opens up.
Huh.
So it's the magnetic field. Now, what's a static magnet, unlike an electromagnet, which is pulsing.
Right.
A static magnet is permanent. It's just not moving.
Right.
Because of that, it's relying on the activity of the body itself.
Okay.
So the body's interacting. So if I put a magnet, let's say here on top of my finger,
right,
and there's circulation going underneath,
right,
all kinds of minerals are flowing under that magnet. And that's called magnetohydrodynamics for those who really are interested.
Interesting. Okay.
All right, so the blood's flowing underneath it, so the blood's active,
right,
and that blood, those ions have to pass under and through that magnetic field.
Got it.
So therefore, they're agitated and stimulated, and some small amount of charge is produced. Now, what Nikola Tesla found out is that when you pulse magnetic fields, and you can use different levels of intensity of the pulse, when you start to pulse magnetic fields through the tissue, you get much more dynamic action. Now you got a dynamic magnetic field, and you got a dynamic body.
Okay. So it's better to have, thus the electromagnetic field is better than just my refrigerator magnet.
Typically. I still use refrigerator magnets. They still have a value to some extent. You just have to know when and how, but I wouldn't rely on it because it doesn't go deep enough. It's not going to heal a concussion.
Right.
It's not going to heal a bone because it doesn't go deep enough. It's not strong enough. You need a huge magnet to do that. Right.
Interesting. And so I guess then tons of questions here, but what typically, so somebody is coming to you now, what are they coming to you for? And then kind of what's the protocol? If you could give us a couple like case studies or just examples of people. I mean, who calls you? Who's coming to your office? Because I'm assuming you don't just do family practice now. I'm assuming you're more niched.
Well, actually, I retired from holistic medicine, and all I do is work with drpawluck.com full time.
Oh, okay.
So the people who used to come, basically, 40 to 60% of the reasons for visits to doctors is pain.
Right.
Right? So then you're dealing with pain. And the first thing the doctor would have to say to himself, I want to remove your pain, but first of all, I want to make sure that I can heal your pain.
Okay.
Because if I simply give you Tylenol or ibuprofen, all I'm doing is covering the pain.
Right. You're going to be back.
And if you stop the Tylenol, the pain will come back until the problem has healed itself.
Right.
So the first objective is to try to heal the pain, improve function, and symptom relief. Because you almost always get symptom relief. It doesn't really matter. That's sort of a freebie.
Okay.
All right. But what's not free is the functional improvements and the physiologic changes that go with the healing process. And so PEMFs, basically by virtue of circulation, by virtue of decreasing inflammation, by stimulating RNA and DNA, by stimulating ATP, by increasing nitric oxide in the body, by affecting the immune cells of the body, the adenosine receptors. So in other words, PEMFs have a large number of actions in the tissues.
Okay.
You and I can't dial that action.
Mm-hmm.
We give the body a non-specific stimulus.
Right.
And the body says, okay, I can use this.
Right.
And the body starts to do what it wants to do with it.
Okay.
And then you'll get all these different physiologic actions rolling themselves out until the problem has basically been solved. Basically using all basically 25 actions of the body.
Okay.
That are stimulated by the magnetic fields. I also cover this in my book, Supercharge Your Health with PEMF Therapy. So the Power Tools for Health book was more of the science, more the technical aspects of it. We do get into how to use magnetic fields and so on, but not to a great extent. And people have said, okay, fine, I read the preface and I'm okay with the science. Tell me how to use it.
Exactly. Yeah. What's the practical application? Yes.
So the Supercharge Your Health with PEMF's book then starts to get into the 80 different health conditions. So how do you select a magnetic system for one of those conditions? How do you apply it? What else can you be doing alongside using the magnetic field? Right. So basically, we cover a lot more practical information in the Supercharge Your Health book. And then we help people to decide what kind of magnetic system to get. So we talk about a fridge magnet. Well, I don't talk about fridge magnets in the Supercharge Your Health because it's about pulsed electromagnetic field, so PEMF, right?
Yep.
So then we review all of that, the science, to some extent, less science, some background, but all the different conditions that magnetic fields are now working for. And how do you use them? So the fractures that I mentioned, the non-union fractures, they were using a very low, very local, but a low-intensity magnetic field. So magnetic field intensity is the unit of charge, the unit of measurement of magnetic field intensity is Gauss, Gauss. So it turns out that there's a receptor called the adenosine receptor, which also is part of the molecule adenosine triphosphate, right, to make adenosine, the energy molecule of the body.
Okay.
So it turns out the research says that you need about 15 Gauss to optimally affect the adenosine receptor, which then, because it sits on the white blood cell, the neutrophil, which then circulates through the body and does its healing work. But the optimal level is 15 Gauss.
Okay.
And so as a result, what you have to do is you have to do a calculation of what the problem is, how deep it is into the body, how big an area you're trying to treat, and then you have to basically figure out how long you have to treat for. So these fractures use an 18 Gauss magnetic field.
Okay.
18, 1-8. And they were told by the prescribing doctors and the magnetic company, you got to be using it for at least 9 hours a day.
Right.
9 hours a day. So they went back and surveyed about 350 people who had done that, had gotten these devices, and were using them, and asked them, how many hours a day are you using it? And then they monitored them to see how long it took them to heal. What they found is that if you didn't do 9 hours a day, if you did 9 hours a day or more, you healed in 3 months. Okay, this is a fracture that's been there for at least 6 months and maybe even years.
Right.
And then the people who did 3 hours or less a day took 6 months to heal.
Okay.
So the time that you use the magnetic fields for then determines the rate of healing.
Got it.
Depending on the problem you have, depending on nutritional factors and a bunch of other factors as well. So time then becomes important. So choosing the right intensity for the problem you're working with, and then knowing how to deliver that intensity to the body, all become important to produce the best results.
And so what just specific conditions would you typically what specific conditions would you say is it most effective on?
It's hard to say what it's most effective on because it depends on the fractures. Those non-union fractures, if they were using a 60 Gauss magnetic field or a 200 Gauss magnetic field, they would get better results faster.
And so since you brought that up, is there any harmful effects as you move up this Gauss scale?
So first of all, the most important thing about PEMFs is that they're considered extremely safe.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. MRIs.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Actually, I wrote that down in my paper. So yes, because I was like, there's MRI.
they're 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 Gauss, even higher.
Because it's because basically they're using a magnetic field to take an internal picture or a picture of your body, right?
Well, there you have two kinds of fields. You have a static magnetic field, like a bar magnet, and then you have a pulsing radio frequency magnetic field, a pulsing field.
Got it.
So the bar magnet stands the electrons or the protons up, holds them in place, and then you let go and you stimulate them with the pulse field.
Okay.
That's one aspect of it. Anyway, so the point I'm trying to make is that even with those extremely high intensities, they're considered to be extraordinarily safe. And because of the radio frequency field, it jiggles things too much. If you have a tattoo or if you have metal in your body, you have to be extraordinarily careful.
Okay.
Okay, with the kind of magnets that we use for healing, we don't typically have to worry about that.
And so what's kind of the range when you're using these healing magnets, kind of what's the range of Gauss on those then?
Well, again, if we start with the principle of inflammation, that you need at least 15 Gauss, I would say no less than 15.
Right.
And that's at the surface.
Right.
Now, magnetic fields have another aspect that we're all aware of, like cold and heat and sound and light. As you move farther and farther away from it, it becomes weaker and weaker and weaker. And it's logarithmic. It's not a straight line. Okay, it's logarithmic. And so magnetic fields are subject to that law as well, the inverse square law. And so you have to calculate the dose that you need for the tissue that you're treating. So if you're treating the skin, all you need is 15 Gauss.
Okay.
If you're treating the brain, if you want to go across the brain from one side to the other, like with a head injury, you put a magnet here, and it's got to go all the way across to deliver 15 Gauss. Right. Which means that by the time it leaves this area and goes to the other area, you've lost 95% of your field. It goes from 4,000 Gauss to 15 across 6 inches.
Okay.
So you have to account for that. So if you're treating the brain or the lungs or the liver or the belly or hip, so you have to sort of know the dose that you need. Now, even if you choose a dose that's too high for what you need, most of the time the body ignores the magnetic field when it doesn't need it. Okay.
So it's kind of like, like vitamins that are water soluble or whatever you're going to pee out what you don't use type thing.
You don't use, yes. Better to have expensive urine than cheap urine.
Right. Yes.
So magnetic fields, then getting the right intensity becomes important. Okay. Then once you know the intensity that you're looking to get, and knowing that you can waste it, there's no harm in wasting it because it's not going to hurt you if you have too much. Okay. Then you have to calculate, you figure out what kind of magnetic device you're going to get. How strong does it have to be? How big does it have to be? What are you trying to accomplish? And anybody doing magnetic field therapy, I think, should be thinking about magnetic field therapy for life. Okay. Okay, and if you're going to get a whole body magnetic system, then that's going to give you whole body health. Well,
and so that's right? What I was going to say, and I've heard, and you can feel free to name anything, any brands that you want to. I will abstain because I don't want to step on anyone's toes. But so a whole body magnetic system, is that something you're like laying on, sleeping on? Is it a tube? Is it a tunnel? Okay,
you can lay on it. You can lay on it for treatment, or you can. Some of them will allow you to use them all night long. Generally speaking, the magnetic systems that are the strongest, that will do the most healing in the body, can't be run all night. Okay, meaning you have short cycles of runtime, maybe 15 minutes, 8 minutes, 15, 20, 30 minutes.
Because the device can't handle it, or because your body can't handle it?
No, people are being cautious.
Oh, okay. All right.
All right, so sometimes it's the device can't handle it. It's just too much power that has to be delivered by the device, and it will heat up, it'll warm up. Yep. Right? So you can run, some of these machines run basically, as I said, for 3 minutes, even upwards of, I know one machine that we have that runs 3.5 hours. Okay. But so you have to pick the time element that you want, but then you have to pick the applicators that you want, and then you have to pick the characteristics of the equipment of the machine itself. So you have to sort of combine those parameters. And I provide guidelines in the Supercharge Your Health book for how you should think about a magnetic field and what you should get for your problems. If you're going to be spending $4,000 for a magnetic system, I know there are many companies that are selling, multi-level companies that are selling magnetic systems. One is a Beamer, one is an IMRS, and they are less than 1 Gauss.
Is that right?
You're spending $6,000 for a machine that's less than 1 Gauss.
And so, and I had heard that I had heard of the Beamer, and that's again why I abstained. But since you brought up the name, so that Beamer bed is giving off less than 1 Gauss. Why is that? Why would they not amp that thing up to at least 15?
Well, a lot of it has to do with legacy. A lot of it has to do with research done 25, 30 years ago.
Okay.
And so research done 25 to 30 years ago was often done in petri dishes or test tubes.
Okay.
And they say, aha, this magnetic field does the following, and all we have to do is to replicate that magnetic field.
But they just didn't get the intensity dialed up.
About the inverse square law.
Okay, right, yep.
Right? And the science, the 15 Gauss requirement basically for inflammation for the adenosine receptor is new.
Okay.
It's only in the last 5 or 10 years that we knew about the adenosine receptor. So the devices have evolved, but these are legacy devices. They were developed and sold, for 25 years now.
Right.
And they don't read my books.
And it is what it is on their side. So are there systems out there then that, if I'm looking at myself, I don't have any major health concerns. I don't have major pain to speak of. I could use, I think everybody could use more energy. I could definitely use more energy. But if I was really proactive and leaning in and said, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try this. I'm going to see how this works. And really wanted something that was more holistically whole-bodied, what would I be looking at? So
again, in the Supercharge Your Health book, I provide some guidelines for that, and identify the different devices. And also at drpawluck.com, if you don't want to buy the book, there's a product comparison guide that you could look up the intensity, the kind of system that has pictures. So then you basically decide what you can afford. You can decide what you want to be able to accomplish. And as I said, a minimum of 15 Gauss, minimum.
Right. And then, so here's another way I'm going to ask it until I get my answer is what do you use? What do you use for?
Whatever I need. So one of the benefits that I have is my knowledge, and so that I can pick and choose among the systems to do what I want.
Right.
But if you want to get one system that's going to cover most of the waterfront.
Right. Yep.
And you wanted to do not only take care of problems that you might have right now,
right,
but in anticipation, because you said you don't have a problem
today.
You don't have a problem yet.
Yes, right, fair enough.
All right. So 5 years from now, 10 years from now, who knows what you need?
Right.
But even if you don't have a problem that you need something for, 5 to 10 years from now, you're going to be older.
Right.
You're going to have aged. And if you're doing magnetic field therapy on a regular basis, even at a younger age, you're maintaining the body at a much healthier level of optimized functioning.
Right. Well, that's what
you have the right intensity magnetic system.
And that's kind of where I was headed to some degree is if I'm doing something for regular maintenance or regular therapy, even if I don't have any aches and pains to speak of that I can identify or anything specific, any one specific condition, is it smart or is it advantageous from an anti-aging standpoint to do some type of regular maintenance just for overall health?
Absolutely. So let me remind you and everybody else, you probably knew this already, but I'll say it at that risk. Number one, there are 100 trillion cells in our bodies, approximately.
Okay.
Give or take trillions.
Right.
Right? Every single cell in the body has about 5,000 biochemical processes per second.
Wow. Okay.
Per second. So what do we need for treatment? What do we need to do to keep that machine humming and healthy? Whatever it takes.
Right.
If you buy a 1 Gauss machine, it's going to give you a little bit of benefit, and most likely that benefit is going to happen by actions on the acupuncture system, because that's very superficial in the way it acts.
Right.
But if you want to work deeper into the tissues and the body, and have anti-aging effects into the brain, anti-aging effects into your hip or shoulders or knees, especially if you're very active and very like if you're a biohacker, right, and doing all that kind of physical work, then you're going to need something stronger. I generally recommend having no less than 1,000 Gauss.
Okay, there we go. See, we're starting to get to my answer now. So 1,000 Gauss, all right, gets me some at least some type of
a reasonably powerful machine.
Got it.
The problem is that most of the machines that are commercially available rarely get about 50 to 200 Gauss.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah. And we have some machines that actually are above that 1,000 Gauss threshold.
Right. Okay.
And they're going to be more expensive.
Right.
However, you can spend $6,000 for a 1 Gauss machine, a Beamer, or around $5,000 for an IMRS or a QRS, or Pure Wave. You spend that kind of money for those machines and not get almost nothing. People do say they feel better with them. Right. Absolutely, agreed. I've seen that. They do get better, but they're stimulating the acupuncture points and meridians. And if you're trying to heal, you're not going to get much value.
Interesting. Okay.
So at a minimum level, and this is always evolving. And on drpawluck.com, we have a store and we have different devices that we recommend.
Right.
And as I said, there's a product comparison guide. So then, if you want to get a 1,000 Gauss machine, that's for whole body use.
Mm-hmm.
And what you want for whole body is going to be different than what you may want for local. Like if I have migraines,
Right.
or if I have a torn rotator cuff,
Right.
or I already have arthritis in my hip,
Mm-hmm.
then I have to consider the device I'm going to need to get to treat those local areas, and then as well as getting yourself the benefit of whole body magnetic therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're already making the investment in the machine. The biggest part of the investment usually is the control unit.
Okay. And then the other things are ancillary things you plug in.
Ancillary, and you add them on as you need to. So the biggest cost is the control unit. So if you don't get the right control unit in the first place,
Right.
if you buy a skateboard, you can try to go as fast as you want, but you're still going to be going fast on a skateboard.
Right. Right. And
Relatively fast on a skateboard.
And so you've just mentioned some things: migraines, arthritis, rotator cuff. Are these all things that you've seen patients like either get better from or fully recover from?
Absolutely.
So like
Absolutely.
so like migraines can be super debilitating. I think I've experienced maybe one in my life, but probably a very mild one if that. But migraines, I mean, I've known people who have had migraines and you're just out, right? There's no. When I get a headache, I'm like, do I still want to live? So that's at a headache level. When you get a migraine, I'm like, I don't even know how people function at that level.
And you're absolutely right. But there's a spectrum.
Okay. And so is it effective at curing, stopping, whatever migraines? I'm just asking.
Okay. So the way I look at it is ideally you want to prevent.
Yep, exactly. You don't want to get it at all.
It happen in the first place, because once it happens, the horse is out of the barn.
Exactly. Yep.
Right, and then so then it becomes much harder to control once it's gained momentum.
Okay.
In terms of the physiologic changes that happen with it.
Right.
So if you start right at the beginning, or better yet, if you're doing treatment every day,
right,
you can prevent it.
Well, yeah. Okay. And so you've seen that though.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And there is I don't think it's around anymore, but there was a magnetic therapy device approved by the FDA, and they were using it just for that purpose. More for prevention than for treatment. And that was a 4,000 Gauss machine, and you're talking about a $7,000, $8,000 machine.
Wow. And so that was like a helmet type thing that you just put on and wore for certain.
Actually, more like a collar.
Okay, so you put on a collar.
You put it at the back of the neck.
Okay, and so you put that on for some length of time every day, 10, 15
usually
minutes.
30 minutes, 60 minutes.
Okay, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, but that would literally prevent migraines from reoccurring?
Very often. So if it hasn't prevented them, depending on, again, the causes and the general aggressiveness and severity of the headaches that people get, it may decrease the severity from, say, 7 to a 3.
Okay.
So even if you're using it all the time, it may not stop you from having them altogether.
Right.
You may have fewer headaches. You may have less severe headaches.
Right.
But you have to continue the magnetic therapy as a preventative.
Right.
Now, if you happen to have a machine that can increase the intensity, if it's escaped the prevention, then you may have to hit it with a much stronger magnetic field, and you could even combine it with medication. And very often, if you combine magnetic therapy with medication, you may need less medication.
Right.
And that's common.
More effective.
We see that reasonably commonly. So anything, basically, when you think about it, anything in the body, because it's a body, because it's tissue, because it's molecules, and magnetic field therapy interacts with that, and there's charge everywhere. There isn't a cell in the body that doesn't have charge associated with it.
Right.
There's really nothing that magnetic field therapy can't help at some level.
Okay, right, and that's probably the disclaimer, right? It can help it at some level. Doesn't mean it cures it. Doesn't mean it.
Well, I don't talk about cure.
Exactly, right. Right.
And there's a possibility that things can be cured, like my spider bite.
Yeah. Right.
Example. That was cured.
Right.
I caught it early. I used the right piece of equipment, and I was able to cure it. Now, if it had been there for 3 or 4 days already, and the skin is broken down, I have a wound, an open wound, well, it's going to take a lot longer to heal.
Sure. Right. Because more damage is done. The more damage.
The more damage is done. You have more recovery to do.
Right.
But it doesn't really matter. We can do the immune stuff. People who have autoimmune diseases should be using magnetic therapy. Every diabetic should be on a magnetic therapy machine. Every diabetic.
And why is that? What's going on there?
What happens with diabetes? Diabetes is basically a vascular problem. Most of the problems in diabetes are vascular.
Okay, so poor
The
circulation.
diabetic process affects the blood vessels in the body, whether it's for your eyes or your brain or your heart or your PAD, peripheral vascular disease. It's a vascular disease.
Right.
Controlling the blood sugars, the blood sugar itself contributes to that process, and the blood sugar elevations cause inflammation. So you get inflammation, then you concentrated inflammation in the blood vessels, and then concentrated inflammation throughout the body, which means the body doesn't heal well from wounds.
Right.
This is a whole body problem. It's not just a kidney problem. It's not just an eye problem.
Right.
It's a whole body problem. So you need a strong enough magnetic field that's going to be able to treat the entire body while you're going through the stuff that you should be doing to help to control your diabetes, which is usually diet.
Right.
If you're not doing proper diets, you're pouring gasoline on the fire and then trying to put the fire out with medications, well,
it's not going to work.
Not much.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Interesting. And so basically from your perspective, you've been doing this a long time. There's nothing that an electromagnetic field can't affect in a positive way from a health standpoint. We had touched on briefly, I think in a pre-show, psychology, or you had mentioned psychology, and I hadn't really thought of that before. But I have very good friends of mine who are also business partners who are physicians, and I remember early on when we became partners and became friends that one of my physician partners was at that point a general practice doc, and he said, he was, I think the percentage he gave me is like 60 to 80% of the illness we see is really psychological illness. It's manifesting itself physically, right? So people are lonely or they're depressed or they've got something's going on, and then it becomes a physical ailment. But really, he said, I just wish, and of course that was a model 15 years ago. He goes, I just wish we had the ability to affect that and had the time to affect it, but that's not the way that the medical model's set up. I can't afford to live on what it would take to treat people for an hour, right? Based on those old models of insurance reimbursement. And so how does electromagnetic field, I guess, what's it do for the brain health or psychology? Because the brain is nothing but fat and electricity, right?
Well, it is fat and electricity and molecules.
Right.
There's an important paper written by a psychiatrist some time ago, 3 or 4 years ago, wrote a paper called Rhythms and Blues.
Okay.
And that paper was basically about how magnetic field therapy has now been discovered and FDA approved to treat treatment-resistant depression using high-intensity magnetic fields to the brain.
Okay.
So the question becomes, well, if you're dealing with molecules, we have all these drugs, these antidepressant medications. Well, how can magnetic field therapy work when it's not a medication? And it's not a molecule.
Right.
Right. So in Rhythms and Blues, what he describes is that how long does it take for an antidepressant to begin to work in the body? 2 to 4 weeks.
Right.
Right. That means in that period of time, there's a higher rate of suicide in those people while the medication's kicking in.
Right.
So he's thinking now, why is it? What's the lag time that's going on here? So he was talking about synapses and the molecules attaching to synapses and then changing the biochemistry of the brain, the general chemicals that are being produced by the brain, and then eventually ending up hopefully with balancing out the problem in the first place. What medicine has discovered is that as you move up that ladder in terms of the effects of the drugs, you begin to see what we call oscillations in the brain.
Okay.
Right now, your brain is in beta, mostly. Okay, beta means alertness.
Okay.
When you're chilling and just sitting back and relaxing, and you're not processing what we're talking about, you're in alpha. Alpha is just a relaxed state. When you're watching the soaps and not thinking and not getting emotionally involved, you're just watching.
Right.
You're an observer.
Right.
That's alpha. When you first fall asleep, your head goes into theta.
Right.
Okay, and then you go down into delta.
Right.
Well, there are chemicals associated with those individual states, but it's all frequencies. So you can have a lot of frequencies, or you can have slow frequencies. So delta is like
really slow.
Really slow.
Right.
And what you're doing then is we know from all kinds of ways, audiovisual entrainment. So it's called entrainment. We can use entrainment measures or techniques to slow down those brain waves.
Yep, I've done that before. They've hooked me up into a machine and I had to focus. It was like, well, this was just focus, but the sound, right? So I could hear what waves I was in based on the sound, and then I could change the focus of my brain literally by like focusing. It was hard, and then I could bring myself down into theta. I don't know if it was into delta, but I know I could bring myself into theta. But it was like a lot of energy and effort to maintain theta because I was so used to being in alpha during the, and in a day I'd just be. So what I used to think was meditation was really alpha. Alpha wasn't necessarily
theta.
It wasn't where I needed to be, which was more in theta, which was much more focused. So, but anyway,
so the difference between PEMFs then and sound light therapies,
right,
is that sound light therapies go into the ears and go to the auditory cortex,
right,
and then they go through the eyes into the visual cortex, and they start to change the rhythms in the cortex, but it's an indirect action.
Right.
It's not a direct action into the brain.
Right.
It's an indirect action to the brain. Magnetic fields, because they go right through the brain, are direct action to the brain. And so if you're pulsing the magnetic field at the rate that you want the brain to shift into, or you want to amplify, because the brain is in all kinds of frequencies all the time. It's not one frequency for the whole brain. Right. So what you're doing then is you're shifting more and more of the cells that are already sort of edging towards that frequency. You're shifting them into that frequency better. So the stronger the magnetic field, the stronger the audiovisual entrainment, the more reaction your body will have to it, and the faster it will tend to shift. And so with PEMF therapy, you're doing the same thing. I had a woman in my office who was extraordinarily anxious. She was so fidgety, I didn't think she'd complete the visit.
Right.
She sat down for only 3 or 4 minutes, and then got up and started pacing.
Right.
Like a
caged animal.
In a cage,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
An animal, a scared animal in a cage.
Right.
So I got a portable battery operated magnetic device, one coil, and put it at the back of her neck. So I'll show you this coil. Well, it wasn't this one, but it's like this. Okay. So a coil like that.
Okay.
All right. You can take a coil like this and you put it at the base of the skull, at the back of the head. Turn the equipment on and run it at the maximum intensity. So she put it on and she held it in place where the collar kept it in place. And she kept pacing. Literally within 3 or 4 minutes, you could see the elevator coming down. I mean, she just settled down. And she sat down and sat for the rest of the visit. So I asked her what her level of anxiety was when she first walked in to the office. She said a 7 out of 10. I thought she was 13 out of 10.
Right. I was going to say, you thought she was much higher. You're like, no.
She's used to it. She probably knows that she has been much higher. Much worse.
Yeah. Right.
So, and then I said, okay, now what are you? At the end of the interview, at the end of the treatment, now what are you? And she said 3. So she went from 7 to 3, and she was very, very happy.
Right.
It didn't make her happy, but she was very happy that she wasn't a 7.
7, right. Yeah. Right.
Right? So that's a relatively low intensity magnetic field, 200 Gauss to the base of the brain that controls the brain waves, which then controls the chemistry.
Okay.
So we're working through a physics mechanism, an electromagnetic mechanism to affect the chemistry rather than a chemistry mechanism to affect the magnetic therapy, magnetic fields in the brain. So the brain's always oscillating, right? And again, the chemicals in the brain are producing that, but so are our thoughts. You can think yourself into a more relaxed state.
Right.
Through meditation, through practice, and so on. You're inducing it yourself.
Right.
So the doctor was right, and I used to think this as well, that 80% of the problems that walk into your office, into the door of the office, are psychological.
Right.
They start with psychological.
Right.
They end up physical.
Yep.
But I'm going to argue that point because I think it starts with spiritual.
Yes.
And then it goes to psychological.
Right.
And then it cascades down into the physical.
Yes, definitely. Yes. I see your point, and I will agree. I will concur. The interesting stuff. So you've got a book, right, to supercharge your health with PEMF. You also put on a summit. Is that correct?
Yes, our summit should be launching the pre stuff for the summit is going to be launching shortly. And then in the second week in July is when we start the formal summit, and people can get on board and sign up or watch actually videos free for the first few days. You can watch videos every day for free.
Okay.
And then if you want the whole summit, then you can register and purchase the summit. And many people purchase it because what happens is so much information given to you in these hour-long interviews or lectures. That you then need to have something that you have as a resource that you can continue with.
And the summit's basically just an education similar to what we're doing today, but I'm sure at a much deeper level, education around what electromagnetic therapy is, how it works, what you should do based on different symptoms. Is that kind of what the summit's about?
Correct.
Okay, so this is so if you are looking to take, your knowledge deeper, or just like myself, you may have some general knowledge, but really don't have enough to really know how to effectively treat yourself and or do maintenance. This is the next step, it sounds like, of attending the summit and or going to your website, right? So you could go to, and is it just drpawluck.com?
Correct.
Okay.
And you can get one of the two books.
Yep.
The summit is going to be much more in-depth, for sure. And we have over 40 speakers. We have some videos that talk about specific aspects of magnetic field therapy, and many of the speakers are using other technologies.
Interesting.
So you can't build a house without bricks and mortar.
Right. Yep.
Right. You have to have the nutrients available in the body, like those non-union fractures that I mentioned.
Right.
You need to have the resources for the body to be able to heal itself.
Right.
You need the calcium, you need the phosphorus, you need the boron, you need so many other things that you need. If you're missing those, then it's not going to heal properly.
Right.
Even with stimulation. So having many of these other resources adds to whatever PEMFs can do. And the good thing about PEMFs is, the way I look at them, at least as a family physician, former family physician and holistic doctor, is you got to own your own equipment. You can't go somewhere to get treatment. Because if it's for health maintenance, you can't just sort of treat now and then.
Right.
But you got 5,000 biochemical processes per second.
Right.
How much treatment do you need?
Right. Exactly. Well, awesome. Incredible.
Well, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Before I go, one thing we didn't talk about.
Yes.
And I'm sorry about that.
No. That's...
There will be people who will ask, what's the difference between EMFs, because they've heard the so-called...
Yeah. I didn't... Yeah. I had thought that, right? But yeah.
And then PEMFs.
Right.
So PEMFs is pulsed electromagnetic fields.
Right.
EMFs in PEMFs is similar to what we say about EMFs. I make a big distinction. I mentioned at the beginning that open loop is where you broadcast out into the environment, and that's frequencies.
Right.
Closed loop is the magnetic field bouncing around through a wire.
Right.
Right? So EMFs are frequency based, and most of the ones that we are worried about are basically microwaves.
Right.
And why are microwaves a problem? Because they get absorbed. The frequencies are so shallow. The magnetic field going through a wire is so strong, and it goes out and comes back. So basically, it's not a frequency, it's a pulse, and that's why we call it pulsed electromagnetic field.
Okay.
All right, so it's pulsing, and that doesn't have a wavelength.
Okay.
Per se. And even if it did have a wavelength, we can produce PEMFs that way, that broadcast as well, but they have very long wavelengths. And so you have to, if you get above 100 megahertz, 100 megahertz, the wavelength for 100 megahertz is 3 meters long.
Wow.
It's as long as most bodies.
Right.
Right? But if you think of the diameter side to side or front to back, it goes right on through, even at 100 megahertz. But gigahertz, the wavelengths are so short, they don't go through the body. They get absorbed.
Interesting. Okay.
And when they get absorbed, they cause heating, and they cause DNA damage.
Got it.
So when you put a cell phone to your head, and you're listening on a cell phone, you'll see almost right away, you'll see the ear turn red.
Interesting.
When you remove the cell phone, the ear persists in being red for a while.
Right.
The opposite ear is not red. It may be slightly redder, but not very red because of reflex actions of the blood vessels.
Okay.
But you're basically, when you're holding a phone to your ear, you're cooking your ear.
And I've heard
you're cooking it.
Yeah. Wow.
That's what we do with microwave ovens. We're cooking.
Yep.
Right, so that's the distinction between EMFs and PEMFs. So PEMFs are extraordinarily safe because they don't have the wavelength.
Got it. And thank you for the clarity around that, because I did write that down earlier, and we just didn't get to that point of clarification yet. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was very enlightening. Certainly for our listeners and our audience, please reach out to those resources we mentioned. We'll put those also in the show notes. We certainly appreciate the work that you're doing and the time that you shared with us today. So thank you so much for being a part of our podcast.
I appreciate being here with you as well, and you ask great questions, and I hope your audience and listeners will have learned something.
Thank you for being a part of the BriteVibe podcast. For more information, go to BriteVibe.com. That's BriteVibe.com. Thank you for listening.